November 16, 1960, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, 10:11 p.m. The heart monitor flatlined. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, combat veteran, the most famous man in America for the better part of 3 decades, was gone. 59 years old, gone with a Nevada desert tan still on his face and rope burns still healing on his hands from the last film he would ever make. The nurses who were present said the room became very quiet. Not the clinical quiet of a medical procedure ending. Something else. The particular silence that descends when something irreplaceable leaves the world, and the world takes a moment to register what it has lost. Outside the hospital, within hours, the news moved across America like a current. Radio stations interrupted their programming. Newspaper editors pulled front pages. Telegrams arrived at the studio from heads of state and foreign dignitaries and ordinary people who had never met Clark Gable but felt, with complete sincerity, that something had been taken from them personally. He had been in their lives for 30 years. He had been Rhett Butler and Fletcher Christian and Gay Langland and 100 other men. He had sat in the waist gun position of a B-17 over occupied Germany and refused to come home when they told him to. He had loved one woman with the kind of totality that most people only read about, and when she died, he had carried that love like ballast for 18 years rather than put it down. Now the carrying was done. And before they buried him, America needed to remember exactly who he had been. He had not always been a king. The boy who became Clark Gable was born in Cadiz, Ohio in 1901 into a family that had nothing and expected nothing different. His mother dead before he could remember her, his father an oil driller who moved constantly and regarded his son as a complication. Young Clark grew up learning the essential skill of the unwanted, how to become useful enough that people chose to keep you around, how to read a room, how to make yourself necessary through charm and effort, and the particular intelligence of someone who has never been able to afford the luxury of being ignored. He arrived in Hollywood with bad teeth, protruding ears, and the kind of raw physical presence that camera lenses understood immediately even when studio executives did not. It took years. It took roles that went nowhere and rejections that would have ended lesser men and a stubborn, patient determination to outlast every obstacle until the right moment arrived. When it arrived completely. By 1934, when Frank Capra's It Happened one night swept the Academy Awards and the man playing the rumpled, confident reporter at the center of it became the face America could not stop watching. Clark Gable was not simply famous. He was something rarer. He was beloved. He became the standard against which other men were measured. Not because he was perfect, he was not. He was rough-edged and flawed, and had made choices in his personal life that cost him. But he had something that cannot be manufactured and cannot be taught, cannot survive being faked for very long, the quality of a man who is exactly what he appears to be. No performance, no gap between the public face and the private one. What you saw was what existed. That quality, that absolute unguarded authenticity, was what filled theaters for 30 years. And it was what the United States Army Air Forces sent to England in 1943 wearing a captain's uniform. Hollywood created the legend. The war revealed what the legend was made of. When Clark Gable enlisted in August 1942, he was 41 years old and the most famous man in America. The military did not need him in combat. They needed him at Bond rallies and recruitment posters and carefully staged appearances designed to put a famous face on the war effort. Dozens of Hollywood stars served exactly that way. Vital work, genuine contribution, and a long way from anyone trying to kill them. Gable refused it. He had not enlisted to be a symbol. He had enlisted because Carole Lombard was dead and he had nothing left to protect, and he wanted to go somewhere where the danger was real and the possibility of not coming back was genuine. He wanted combat specifically. He trained as an aerial gunner, one of the most dangerous positions in the entire Air Forces, because the waist gun position of a B-17 offered the shortest life expectancy and the most direct exposure to enemy fire. He chose it deliberately. In England with the 351st Bomb Group, He flew 5 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. He flew them as a working crew member, not a passenger. He sat in the open midsection of a roaring bomber at 20,000 feet in temperatures that froze the moisture in a man's oxygen mask, while German fighters attacked from every angle and flak bursts tore through the fuselage close enough to feel the pressure change in the air. He was not pretending. He was not performing courage for a camera. The crew around him were boys in their 20s who needed every man at his position doing his job, and Clark Gable, movie star, the king of Hollywood, did his job. The crew of the 351st talked about him for the rest of their lives. Not about the celebrity, about the man, about the way he showed up every morning at the same time as everyone else and asked for nothing special and complained about nothing and did the work with the steady, undemonstrative competence of someone who understood what was required and simply provided it. They talked about the mission over Antwerp in September 1943. The flak so thick the pilot said you could walk on it. When Gable stayed at his gun position for the entire duration, while the fuselage around him took hits that killed men in other positions, they talked about the way he climbed back into the aircraft the following morning without discussion. They talked about the mission briefings where younger men, boys really, would look across the room and find Gable already seated and already calm, and feel something loosen in their chests. If he's not afraid, maybe we don't have to be either. One crew member, interviewed decades later, said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. He said that Gable was the best kind of man to have in a bad situation, not because he was fearless, he was not fearless, but because he had already made his peace with the worst possible outcome, which made him calm when other men panicked, and that calm was contagious in the way that genuine courage always is. That crew member paused before adding the thing that mattered most. He said, he didn't have to be there. Every one of us knew he didn't have to be there, and he was there anyway every single day. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, the Presidential Unit Citation, he earned everyone. Not as a symbol, not as a performer, as a man doing a dangerous job in dangerous conditions because he had decided it was the right thing to do, and he was not the kind of man who decided something and then found reasons not to follow through. Men have gone to war for many reasons. Clark Gable's reason had a name. Carole Lombard was 28 years old when she met Clark Gable on the set of No Man of Her Own in 1932. She was already a star, quick and electric and genuinely funny in the way that very few people are, the kind of funny that comes from intelligence rather than performance. She could walk into a room and change its temperature. She could make Clark Gable, a man who had been surrounded by beautiful, accomplished women his entire adult career, feel like the most interesting person she had ever encountered, and make him believe it, because she meant it. He fell completely. They married in 1939. The same year, Gone with the Wind made him immortal on screen. Their ranch in Encino became the place he loved most in the world, not because of its location or its size or its amenities, but because she was in it. She made him laugh in ways that nobody else managed. She matched his stubbornness with her own. She called him by a nickname that nobody else used. She saw the boy from Cadiz, Ohio, underneath the movie star, and loved that boy specifically, the one who had grown up unwanted and learned to be useful and never quite believed that any of it was permanent. He believed it with her. January 16th, 1942. The war bond tour, the plane she boarded over his objection. He had wanted her to take the train, the mountain, the fire. The people who found him at the crash site described a man who had been emptied, standing in the Nevada cold looking at the wreckage and saying nothing. Nothing left to say. Nothing left. Period. A man who had been whole and was now half and knew with terrible certainty that the missing half was not coming back. He never dated casually after Carole. He never spoke about her casually. He never allowed her name to become small talk. She was the sacred thing, the one irreplaceable thing in a life that had contained extraordinary things. And he carried her with him every single day for the 18 years between her death and his own. He almost didn't take the role that made him eternal. In 1938, producer David O. Selznick was casting the most anticipated film in Hollywood history, Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell's novel had sold millions of copies. The search for the actress to play Scarlett O'Hara had become a national obsession, and for the role of Rhett Butler, the magnetic, dangerous, impossible-to-resist Confederate rogue who dominates every scene he enters, there was, in the public imagination, only one possible choice. Clark Gable did not want the role. He was intimidated by the expectation. He understood that the entire reading public of America had already decided who Rhett Butler was, and that whoever played the character would be measured against a collective imagination that no performance could fully satisfy. He worried about failure in the most public possible way. He told MGM he didn't want to do it. MGM persuaded him. The money helped. The contractual pressure helped more. What he produced in those months of filming was something that transcended the worry and the reluctance and the enormous weight of expectation. Rhett Butler, confident, sardonic, genuinely in love beneath all the armor, was Gable at his absolute peak. The famous final line, the dismissal that broke hearts across the world, the swagger and the vulnerability in perfect balance. It was the performance of a lifetime, delivered by a man who almost refused to give it. Gone with the Wind premiered in December 1939. It became the highest-grossing film in history, a record it would hold for decades. And Clark Gable's Rhett Butler became one of the most iconic performances the American cinema ever produced, not because it was technically perfect, because it was completely, unmistakably, irreducibly human. Frankly, my dear, the line that defined him publicly, the line that audiences quoted back to him for the rest of his life. He said it once, in one take that satisfied the director, and then moved on to the next scene. That was how he worked. No fuss, no ceremony, just the work, done right, and move forward. He left one instruction, written years before, waiting to be carried out. Clark Gable's will was clear on the subject that mattered most to him. Bury me next to Carole. Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Glendale, California, the Great Mausoleum, the same building where Carole Lombard had rested since February 1942. He had known exactly where he wanted to go since the day they put her there. He had not needed to be asked. He had simply written it down in the dry legal language of a last will and testament and waited. On November 19, 1960, 3 days after his death, Clark Gable was given a full military funeral. The honors befitting a combat veteran, a decorated airman, a man who had flown over Nazi Germany when he didn't have to. Officers in dress uniform, the folded flag, the rifle salute, the bugle call that carries across every military cemetery in America with the same note of irreducible loss. Hollywood came. The industry that had made him a king and used him and survived him turned out in force. Directors and actors and studio executives, and the ordinary people who had loved him from the darkness of 1,000 theaters standing outside in the California sun. They came because the king was being buried, and it was right to be present for that. And then quietly, he was placed in the Great Mausoleum, in the crypt beside Carole Lombard, 18 years and 10 months after January 16, 1942, 18 years and 10 months after the mountain and the fire, and the man standing in the Nevada cold saying nothing. 18 years and 10 months of films and whiskey and combat medals and 2 failed marriages and 1 good one and a loaded pistol on the nightstand and nightmares that never fully stopped and a final punishing performance in the Nevada desert at 59 years old with no stunt double and rope burns on his hands. All of it finally over. He was home. He never met his son. His son has spent a lifetime honoring a father he never knew. 6 weeks after Clark Gable died, on March 20th, 1961, Kay gave birth to their son, John Clark Gable. The boy his father had known was coming. The boy Clark had talked about in the hospital during those 10 days, the future he was trying to stay present for, the reason to hold on a little longer. The child born into a silence left by the largest presence in Hollywood's history. John Clark Gable grew up with the particular weight of a famous father's absence, carrying a name that opened every door while simultaneously making every room complicated. He grew up watching his father on screens, studying the performances, learning who Clark Gable had been from film reels and interviews and the stories of people who had been there. He became an actor himself for a time. He looked enough like his father that people did double takes. The jaw, the eyes, the physical authority that came through even when he wasn't trying. Kay raised him with the stories, the real ones. Not the studio mythology or the celebrity biography, but the private ones. The man who kept a pistol on the nightstand and woke from nightmares and loved Carole Lombard until his last breath. The man who flew combat missions over Germany because he wanted to die and came back because his crew needed him alive. The man who showed up on time and did the work and never asked for sympathy and treated people with the steady, undemonstrative respect of someone who had started from nothing and never forgot it. John Clark Gable never met his father. He has spent his life understanding him anyway. The King of Hollywood has been gone for more than 60 years. Gone with the Wind is still watched, still debated, still the film that new generations discover and find themselves unable to look away from. And largely because of the man in the center of it. The one who almost refused the role, the one who delivered it in takes that satisfied the director and then moved on without ceremony. The American Film Institute named Rhett Butler the fourth greatest hero in American cinema history. Not a warrior, not an astronaut. A fictional Southern rogue played by a sharecropper's son from Ohio who had to be talked into the part. The 351st Bomb Group veterans, the boys who flew with him over Germany, who were in their 20s when Clark Gable was in his 40s and showed up every morning at the same time as everyone else. Many of them said the same thing in their old age, that he was the most genuinely decent, famous person they ever encountered, that he asked for nothing and gave everything. That in the worst moments at 20,000 feet over enemy territory with fighters coming from every direction, he made them feel that the man beside them was not going anywhere. That he was the best kind of soldier. Not the one who talked the most about courage, but the one who demonstrated it quietly and consistently and never once asked to be recognized for it. That is not a small thing to leave behind. In an era that manufactured heroes out of publicity departments and carefully managed images, Clark Gable was the real thing. A man whose private character matched his public one, whose courage under fire was witnessed by dozens of ordinary Americans who had no reason to exaggerate and every reason to tell the truth. And then there is the love story. The one that started on a film set in 1932 and ended in a mausoleum in Glendale in 1960, and technically never ended at all because he never let it. In an industry built on manufactured romance, on love stories assembled for box office performance and dissolved when the camera stopped, Clark Gable loved one woman genuinely and permanently and carried that love through a war and 18 years of loss and 2 more marriages and a heart attack in the Nevada desert. He asked to be buried next to her. They honored that wish. And somewhere in the great mausoleum at Forest Lawn, the King of Hollywood is finally, permanently, exactly where he always wanted to be. This was Clark Gable. This was Legends of America. A boy from Cadiz, Ohio, who became the most famous man in the world, who flew into enemy fire because he had nothing left to lose, who loved one woman his entire life and never pretended otherwise, who showed up every morning and did the work and carried what he carried without complaint, and gave the camera everything it asked for and kept the rest for himself, the king. And now he rests next to his queen. Subscribe for the next legend, because in America, there was never a shortage of them.